welcome to Read This Next from the Thunder Bay Public Library. I'm Laura, and this is Patience. Joining me again today for a very special episode. We have moved into spooky season. Not everyone's favorite time of year, but one that I truly enjoy. A good reason to talk about all the horror books that I've been reading all year long.
It's not seasonal with us. It's all year round now.
It's all year round. And since Patience is also a horror reader, a fairly new to horror reader,
yes.
I brought her on so that we can talk about some picks. So we're going to do two different spooky season episodes. So this one is specifically slashers. And you might think like, aren't slashers a like movie genre? Well, yes, but there can also be slasher books. So what that means is they have, they kind of feed into and work back from different cliches of the genre, like, you know, don't go into that basement alone. There's that whole like final
all
girl.
All of a sudden, all cars are broken. They were perfectly fine 10 minutes ago, but
the
now
cars are
they're all broken.
The cell phones ran out of battery, whatever. So there's all these like all these cliches that you see in the movies that now you see in these books. And some of them, some of them are pretty gory, but not all of them. And we'll talk, like, as we go through them, we'll kind of give you a bit of a quick little word or two about how gory it is, or so if you want to avoid that sort of thing, we'll try to give you a little bit of heads up of what the book is like. Mm-hmm. So the other thing I just wanted to talk about before we get into this is I just read up a slasher book last night. I'm not going to say the name of it because we don't do negative reviews on this show. We only talk about positive things. If you're really curious and you want to know, you could look on my Goodreads and you'll see which book recently got 1 star. But I'm not going to say the title and put it out there. Anyway, so one of the reasons, well, there's a couple of reasons I didn't enjoy it, but one of the things is that it seemed to be, there was so much like really detailed like sexual violence. Mm-hmm. And not even that, it was threatened mostly, and then like threatened against the main characters, and then also there was like talk of what the bad guys basically had done before. And it was like, I mean, I've certainly read, it's impossible to avoid, sexual violence if you're reading pretty much any kind of literature. Frankly, it doesn't even have to be horror. But it really, really bothered me in this book, and I was trying to figure out why it bothered me so much. And I think because it just felt like it was only included, like it was just, it didn't have to be there for the plot.
It was unnecessary.
It was unnecessary. It could have just been, these people are crazy killers because they are, and they like to kill people. But it's like the author to like, just like dial it up was like, also, I'm going to make these characters be under threat of this sort of this terrible assault as well. And it didn't have to be part of the story, and it didn't feel like it added anything, and it was just felt really gross, and yeah. It's hard for me to like really articulate why. And then I was curious as to if other people had felt the same way, and I found an article written by another librarian who reviews, and this is a YA book actually, and she was raising like the exact same kind of concern. So it's not just me, there's something odd about that particular book, and the way that they handle sexual violence in it. It's unsettling and odd.
I find it like interesting that you brought it up, because that's one of the reasons for a long time I wouldn't read horror, is that wasn't my type of violence. It was hard for me to explain that I'm okay with gore and like murder for whatever reason, but like sexual violence was not something I just would stop reading. It just was like, nope. And there's a lot of horror books that don't include that. So some people may avoid it because of that.
Yeah.
But you could always reach out to the library for books that don't include that.
Yes, we can give you suggestions. That's just a bit of real world that I don't need in my reading.
I read for murder, not for that.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Anyway, so I just wanted to say, to kind of just talk about that really briefly, just to say that, you know, we are aware of, you know, some books, it can feel like, well, you see it in movies or TV shows too, right? It's like, what is the point of this very vulnerable shot, you know, of this woman or whatever? Is this adding something to the story, or are they just doing it to be like titillating, basically? And the books that we've picked are not, they don't have that kind of content. If whatever's in there, it's in there, it's in service of the story. Yeah, if you're curious, like I said, you can go on my Goodreads account. And some people did like it. Yeah, on that happy note, we will now talk about books that that we either read and enjoyed, or ones that had very positive reviews and we are happy to recommend. Okay, so I think Patience is going to start us. No, I'm starting with the first one, aren't I?
Yes.
Yes, I am. Never mind.
I was like, oh no, is it me?
It's me. Okay. So our first one is has a blurb on the front from Stephen King. So that's how you know it's really good.
Yeah.
It's called Final Girls, and it's by Riley Sager. 10 years ago, college student Quincy Carpenter, what a name, went on vacation with 5 friends and came back alone, the only survivor of a horror movie scale massacre. In an instant, she became a member of a club no one wants to belong to, a group of similar survivors known in the press as the Final Girls. Yes, classic. Lisa, who lost 9 sorority sisters to a college dropout's night. Sam, who went up against the Sack Man during her, that's not the scariest name, but I'm sure it was very frightening, went up against the Sack Man during her shift at the Nightlight Inn. And now Quincy, who ran bleeding through the woods to escape Pine Cottage, and the man she refers to only as him.
That's actually quite terrifying.
It is a little terrifying.
It's like the less descriptive, the more frightening I am. I'm scared.
Yeah, sometimes it's like when they include too much detail, it gets more and more cartoony, which is something I'll address in a later book, actually. Okay, the 3 girls are all attempting to put their nightmares behind them, and with that, one another. Despite the media's attempts, they never meet. Now Quincy is doing well, maybe even great, thanks to her Xanax prescription. She has a caring almost fiance, Jeff, a popular baking blog, a beautiful apartment, and a therapeutic presence in Coop, the police officer who saved her life all those years ago. For some reason, when she was starting that, like this sentence, and a therapeutic, I thought they were going to say dog.
I mean,
she doesn't have a therapy dog.
Well, she should.
She probably should. Her memory won't even allow her to recall the events of that night. The past is in the past. That is, until Lisa, the first final girl, is found dead in her bathtub. Ooh. And Sam, the second, appears on Quincy's doorstep. Blowing through Quincy's life like a whirlwind, Sam seems intent on making Quinn relive the past. Relive, with increasingly dire consequences, all of which makes Quincy question why Sam is really seeking her out. And when new details about Lisa's death come to life, Quincy's life becomes a race against time as she tries to unravel Sam's truth from her lies, evade the police and hungry reporters, and, most crucially, remember what really happened at Pine Cottage before what was started 10 years ago is finished.
Ooh.
Da, da, da.
I love, so like, just like a recent thing I've noticed that like Final Girls have come out. Like there's another book that we'll talk about later called The Final Girl Support Group. And this one feels very like, it's funny to me because I heard this book, I was like, oh my goodness, it's like the other book I was going to talk about. But it's also, it feels like the beginning, because I feel like my book is kind of later in life, but this one's still like fresh, kind of. I'll explain it better later, but it's, you know, it's very good. Also, I was thinking while you're reading this, how come there's no final boys? It's always final girls.
Well, sort of discussed a little bit later in one of my things, but partly this one character in a book speculates that perhaps it's because there's like the virginal archetype, right? And that's how you make it to be the final girl. You can't have any faults, right? You can't be the girl who goes off with the boyfriend to fool around, because we all know what happens to that girl in the 80s movies, right? So maybe that has something to do with it. There's not a like virginal boy stereotype.
You know what? Whenever I like watch Jason or anything, I'm just like, I hope I get murdered first. It just looks like too much work to run around screaming the woods. It's just murder me first, please. Just, you know, I find like those murders are the easiest. I'm not afraid. I'm still doing something fun.
Sure.
You know, just off me first, please. Please don't murder me. Also,
but you know,
I'd like to live, but if there was an option.
Speculative, you know, just many years ago, I went to the Haunted Fortnight program, right? That the Fort Wellington Historical Park used to do, with a bunch of friends. And I just remember there was like someone dressed up as a werewolf or whatever, chasing after myself, and my group of friends. My friends were really scared. And so like in a moment of being brave, but also ridiculous because you're purposely there to get scared, I like stopped, turned around and yelled at them to go away. Just like in the moment. I'm sure the actor was like, what? You literally,
No more.
yes, basically like that's enough. Like they're scared.
Yeah. You've done your job.
You've done your job. That's enough.
Go
And I'm
away,
sure the
werewolf
guy was
man.
like, what is happening? That is kind of the point of you being here, but okay. Anyway, okay, so on to the next one.
Yes. Hold on, I'm just trying to.
Oh,
there
and
we
this
go.
next one either has just come out or is going to come out as a movie on Netflix, FYI.
Ooh.
Mhm.
So this one's called There's Someone Inside Your House. I find, you know what, right away, I'm going to start off right off the bat. I wish I said home.
Instead of, okay,
House. I don't know
sounds
why.
more
I just,
personal.
yes, I don't know. Right away, I'm like, someone's inside your home, but house, and like, whatevs.
Okay.
Okay, ready? It's been almost a year since Mackie Young has come to live with her grandmother in the landlocked Nebraska, and she's still adjusting to her new life and is still haunted by her past in Hawaii. Also, I would love to be in
Okay.
Hawaii.
Be haunted by a past in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, one by one, students of her small town high school began to die out in a series of gruesome murders, each with increasing and gruesome flair.
Grotesque, yeah.
Grotesque flair. Again, this is why I want to be murdered first. As the terror grows closer, and the hunt intensifies for the killer, Mackie will be forced to confront her own dark secrets. Stephanie Perkins, bestselling author of Anne and the French Kiss, returns with a fresh take on the classic teen slasher story that's fun, quick-witted, and completely impossible to put down.
So,
Ooh.
you know, just like a fun,
Murder.
talking about all these horrible things. It's just a fun one.
Yeah.
Just, yes, not, you know, not real. It's not a particularly intense one. It's, you know, Stephen King wasn't going to blurb this one, let's just say. It's a lot fluffier than that. And that one is also like actually a young adult book as well. So not that there's not extremely creepy young adult books, but yeah, so there's that one. And she was known for writing romances, and then she took like a hard turn and was like, this is my new thing now. I'm a spooky.
I'm a spooky writer.
I'm a spooky writer. Okay, next one is just hilarious. It's very campy. The cover is absurd. It's ridiculous. It looks very much like some kind of 80s movie. And the title of this book is Clown in a Cornfield. It's by Adam Césaire. Small town with lots of corn. Quinn Maybrook just wants to make it until graduation. She might not make it until morning. Dun, dun, dun. Quinn and her father moved to tiny, boring Kettle Springs to find a fresh start. But ever since the Bay Pen corn syrup factory shut down, Kettle Springs has cracked in half. On one side are the adults who are desperate to make Kettle Springs great again, and on the other are the kids who want to have fun, make prank videos, and get out of Kettle Springs as quick as they can.
I love that they are like a corn town. Like obviously they have corn somewhere.
Yeah.
And then they're like, it's called Kettle Springs, like kettled popcorn.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even make that connection, but
I was like, kettle corn, delicious. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Kettle Springs is caught in a battle between old and new, tradition and progress. It's a fight that looks like it will destroy the town until Friendo, the Bay Pen mascot, a creepy clown in a pork pie hat, goes homicidal and decides that the only way for Kettle Springs to grow back is to cull the rotten crop of kids who lives there now.
Horrifying.
It's so like so what I was saying earlier is that like there's some pretty gross and kind of disturbing like set pieces, but then at the same time this writer really like punctures the tension with almost like with really then goofy things, like literally the murder is like stalking around in a clown costume, and then that's just going to be funny. Like, I mean, maybe if you're really afraid of clowns, then
Yeah, it sounds
this
like my
book's not going to
nightmare.
help. This book's not going to help you. But if you're not afraid of clowns, I did find some of it amusing, darkly funny, interesting. Like a lot of there's not a ton of books that incorporate social media as huge plot points, because writers are still figuring out how to like include that in ways that aren't really boring. But there's like a running thing through it that some of these young people have, like basically like TikTok or TikTok. Goodness gracious, I got it out.
You got it out.
Or like YouTube videos or whatever. And so they're kind of like, some of the things they're doing, like it says, even they're doing it for prank videos, to try and get attention, and that like plays a role in the story. It's pretty good. I did enjoy it. Again, quick read, blurred by Clive Barker, so that's a little bit a little bit more of a serious scare. But yeah, Clown in a Cornfield, what a classic title.
Right. I love that. Just like one day the mascot's like, you know what? I'm just gonna murder a bunch of kids. Just it's like he had no choice. He got in that costume and it was like murder.
The fun thing, like I don't want to give anything away, but it's like it was not all of a sudden.
Ooh.
And it is also one of those stories where like pretty much the bulk of it takes place in one night.
Okay.
So I think there's a little bit of buildup, and then pretty much everything just happens, and it's just you're following these characters as they're trying to make it till dawn.
Nights seem so long in horror movies. Like I don't know what I'm just like, oh my goodness. By then it'd be like 6 days. Like how long is this night?
Whereas
I guess if you're getting hunted.
Yeah, it would feel differently, as opposed to like when I go to bed at night and I'm like, this night is so short. Yeah. Why is my son already banging on the door? It's not morning yet. And then I look and it sort of is. It is morning. Well, like, I mean, it's 5 o'clock, which is morning apparently. Sometimes. Anyway, okay, so this next one is another young adult book. And this one is yours. Yes.
Yes. It's called Survive the Night.
Another happening through the night one.
By Danielle Vega. Julie lies dead and I forgot I read this earlier. It goes right in.
Like cheerful voice, and it's like, that's not the right tone.
That's not right. Julie lies dead and disemboweled in the dark, dank, dark subway tunnel, red-eyed rats nibbling at her fingers. Her friends think she's off with some guy. Just, no one checks on your friends anymore. Just whatever. No one could hear her getting torn apart over the sound of pulsing music. In the tunnel nearby, Casey regrets coming to survive the night, the all-night underground rave at the New York City subway. Her best friend, Shanna, talked her into it. Even though Casey just got out of rehab, that seems like a horrible place to take a friend who just got out of a rehab.
Yeah.
Alone and lost in the dark, creepy tunnels, Casey doesn't think Survive the Night could get any worse until she comes across Julie's body and the party turns deadly. No, thank you. Don't go to a lot of parties to begin with, and murder seems like enough to ruin it for me.
Yeah. Desperate
for help, Casey and her friends find themselves running through the putrid subway systems, searching for a way out. But every manhole is sealed shut, and every noise echoes eerily in the dark, reminding them they're not alone. Seems like a lot of work to show all of those.
It's true, it does.
They're being hunted, trapped underground with someone or something out to get them. Casey can't help but listen to her friend's terrible refrain. We're all gonna die down here. Terrible. It's not very helpful. In this bone-chilling sophomore novel by the acclaimed author of The Merciless. She has
a series, The Merciless, that's like witches, as I recall. Yes, and then this one, a little different. Sounds pretty gross.
Yeah, I'm actually super intrigued. This is the type of book I like. I don't know why. I love like gruesome stuff. Like the idea of like a dead body getting chewed on by rats sounds gross, but also I'm like, maybe I should read that.
I'm intrigued.
I'm intrigued. Someone's already been murdered. I'm like, I hate when you have to wait for the murder.
Sure.
What time is it?
Tedious.
Like,
That was the other thing with the book I just read. It was like the first, I don't know, 60% was like these two characters having like a fight. And then you're like, when is this actually going to happen? And then when it actually does happen, you're like, oh, I wish it didn't happen. This whole book is a disappointment in every way. This one,
really selling this book.
I know I really am. But this one sounds interesting. I like there's kind of multiple creepy things, right? There's like you're underground, claustrophobic, dark, trapped, lost, can't get out. There's a whole bunch of, I mean, would they even know when it's daytime?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
You know what's interesting is like our last two books are taking place during like it looks like current times, right?
Yes.
But a lot of even like a lot of movies still and a lot of books are still done in like the 80s.
Mhm.
Like the 80s, I don't know what's about them. I wasn't alive, but I just assumed there were murderers everywhere. Were there just like murders everywhere? Like it's just a very classic murder scene.
This is true. Yeah. I don't know. True. Well, it's not, I don't mean it's true. There's lots of murders, but I mean, it's true that it does seem to be people are drawn to the time period, certainly.
Yeah.
It's true.
Want a good horror movie? The 80s.
The 80s. Okay. Our next one is another one that I've read, and I think it's actually maybe a duology. And it's called Welcome to the Dark House by Laurie Faria Stolars. What's your worst nightmare? For Ivy Jensen, it's the eyes of a killer that hunt her nights. For Parker Bradley, it's bloodthirsty sea serpents that slither in his dreams. I gotta say, bloodthirsty sea serpents is pretty specific.
It is. And are they like eels? Are they like mermaids? I have questions.
For 7 essay contestants, it's their worst nightmares that win them an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at director Justin Blake's latest confidential project. Ivy doesn't even like scary movies, but she's ready to face her real-world fears. Parker's sympathetic words and perfect smile help keep her spirits up, at least for now. Not everyone is so charming, though. Horror film fanatic Garth Vader wants to stir up trouble. It's bad enough that he has to stay in the middle of nowhere with this group. The girl who locks herself in her room, the know-it-all roommate, Mr. Sensitive, and the one who's too cheery for her own good. Someone has to make things interesting. Except things are already a little weird. The hostess is a serial killer lookalike. The dream-stealing nightmare elf is lurking around, and the 7th member of the group is missing. By the time Ivy and Parker realize what's really at stake, it's too late to wake up and run.
An elf?
Like, that description is probably very confusing.
Yes.
It's like there's this director and writer who does horror movies who's really popular, and then he runs like an essay contest of what's your worst fears, and then the winners get to come and like do a walk-on role on the movie set or something like that. That's what it is. So this is these characters, these who have come for this to the movie set to do, and then things is it just movie magic? What's really happening? Who can say? Yes, and that was another one that was just like a fun, quick YA read that I read like a couple years ago around this time of year.
The elf is like seems like a nightmare elf. I just like picture Elf on the Shelf but angry.
You know what? You don't even have to do anything to the Elf on the Shelf to make him a little creepy. Let's be honest. He's already watching you all the time. Like, there's already a few questionable things.
It was just a moment waiting to happen.
If we're really honest. Oh boy. Okay, so our last highlight is one from you.
So this one's called None Shall Sleep.
Good
by Ellie
Murray?
I'm horrible at names. I don't know what it is. A psychological thriller with 2 teenagers teaming up with the FBI to track juvenile serial killers. Now, I was super intrigued by this, and I am going to check it out. In case anyone's like, how come it's out?
Just to prove your point, this one is set in 1982.
That's what I'm saying. There was something about the 80s that like every second person was probably a murderer. Sorry. Sorry, everyone who was in the 80s.
Okay.
Okay. In 1982, two teenager serial killer survivors, Emma Lewis and
Another
U.S.
final
Marshal,
girl.
classic,
Classic.
the U.S. Marshal candidate Travis Bell are reunited by the FBI to interview convicted juvenile killers and provide insight and advice on cold cases. From the start, Emma and Travis develop a quick friendship, gaining information from juvenile murderers that even the FBI can't crack. But when the team is called in to give advice on an active case, a serial killer who exclusively hunts teenagers, which, by the way, I feel is like most of them. I have yet to hear about a serial killer that's maybe obviously not real serial killers, they scare me. But book serial killers mostly go for teenagers. Just want to like, I don't know. Things begin to unravel. Working against the clock, they must turn to one of the country's most notorious incarcerated.
Nicole and I
murder-
get those all the time. Words that we've only ever read but never said out loud before.
Yes,
And
it's so
try
funny.
and it's like, ooh.
I'm like, I know what it means, but apparently I can't say it. Incarcerate murderers for help. Teenage sociopath Simon Guttermanson.
Whatever you want, because that's just a made up word.
Despite Travis's objections, Emma becomes the conduct between Simon and the FBI team. But while Simon seems to be giving them information they need to save lives, he's an expert manipulator playing the very long game, and he has his eyes set on Emma.
I don't trust the other guy.
The FBI guy?
Yeah, the good guy.
Mm.
Don't trust him.
Okay, I'm super excited. I'm all over this. I'm like, there's a serial killer. He's trying to get Emma. What? I don't know.
It's like Silence of the Lambs, but for teenagers. Right?
Yeah.
Like when she goes in and consults, well, or like Mindhunter, that TV show. That's maybe a more recent reference than Silence
I
of the
Hunt
Lambs.
Killers.
Sure. There's a lot of these YA people, YA characters like dealing with killers and trying to find other killers.
Yeah.
Is that really the best way to do it? I don't know.
There's a lot of questions and moral questions about this, but
yeah, but
the thing about books is you don't have to question.
That's true. It's not real. Okay, our next ones. So these are the ones that we have read. Of course, I'd read a couple of the earlier ones, but these are ones that we've read recently. So my rec has another great title. A lot of these have good titles. This one is called My Heart is a Chainsaw. And it's by Stephen Graham Jones. He had a really pretty big title last year called The Only Good Indians, and it was another like horror creepy book. So you might have heard about, I think it made some like best of year lists or whatever.
Yes, I think I actually read that one.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, there you go. And then this is one of his newer ones. And it is like the main character is a teenager, but I think it is actually an adult book. Not that it, really matters, and it's this young woman who is in a pretty terrible situation, and it becomes clear like very quickly in a few different ways, right? Like her home life is not good. She clearly has some issues that she's not dealing with, and kind of the way that she's getting through life, like kind of her shield is she's obsessed with slashers and horror movies. So she uses that as kind of a prism to look at everything that's happening in her real life, because it allows her to have this distance, which makes her feel more safe. So she's speculating as things are happening in the book that she's in the middle of a slasher. Like she can see the signs of what's about to happen. There's a new girl moves to town, and she's like, oh, this is clearly a final girl. Obviously.
Oh no.
This, she has all these characteristics of the final girl. Clearly she's gonna make it. And this is happening. And that seems to me very, she's like, and that suggests to me that it's gonna be this kind of serial killer. And at the same time that she's making these things, we have a couple passages that happen like not in her point of view. And like the book starts off with some people dying. So it's not a spoiler. It's like the very first thing. So you know that she's not wrong in that something is happening, you know.
Interesting.
But is she drawing the right conclusions? You know, are the decisions that she's making? She kind of wants just everything to burn to the ground. Like the people have been terrible to her, and she's had such a hard life, you know. So is she really making the best decisions? Yeah. Maybe not. Anyway, and it manages to be like at the same time that there's a lot of plot going on, because there's kind of she's kind of trying to solve a case in a way, right, or build a case. There's bits of essays that she had turned in for extra credit about kind of like the history of slashers. There's this yeah, that she'd been like in the story she'd been writing for her history teacher for extra credit. So you get these like bits, almost journal entries that she's been writing, all these different pieces, and it's really quite good. The character herself is so, you just really feel for her, and you get such a clear look into her life and how she's trying to manage like the very, very difficult, painful things that she's dealing with. Really good. I will say the ending goes a little bit off the rails, just in that a bunch of stuff happens. Like so many things happen, and it gets a little confusing. Like there's literally a scene where I was like trying to visualize in my mind what was actually going on, and I was like, I don't even know anymore, like
chaos,
where people are, or like what's happening. So, you know, but I think that this is one of the fun, maybe a funny way to look at a horror book, but this is kind of like a horror book you're reading for the character and her journey, more than you want, you know, you want to track how that plot, intricacies of a plot is going to play out. Not saying you don't get answers, because you definitely do. So if you prefer to know kind of like how things, you don't want it to be open-ended, it does give you that. And then it does also end kind of abruptly, so you don't really get a like, how is she going to deal with things going forward? But despite that, you know, if you can handle that kind of like ambiguity, I really thought it was a really worthwhile ride. Very, very good book. Yeah.
My heart is a chainsaw.
My heart is a chainsaw.
I love it.
Yeah. And then I read that, and then I read another book by him, something like Night of the Living Mannequin or something like that. That one was just a novella, also very creepy in a different way. Yeah, so that's my top pick that you can check out. That's also an Indigenous author, and that is, it doesn't really play much of a role in the main character's life, but that is her background as well.
No, that's so good. I want to check that one out too. I've just recently gone to horror, so there's like so many books I have to like catch up on.
So many. Yeah.
So my book is called The Final Girl Support Group, which is like, it's by Grady Hendrix. Yeah.
Hendrix.
And this book's really cool because the murder stuff happened. And it's about these final girls. I think there's like 6 of them, 5. And they all come together every like once a month to talk about moving on, regular things, and what they've done. But it's really interesting, all the murders that happened to these women that made them final women, they're based on like movies in our world. So like Jason, or I'm trying to think of them now. So it's kind of fun. You're kind of reading their murders and you're like, that sounds really familiar. Like, oh yes, because the names are changed, but the murders are the same. And so they're based off these our world's movies, but in their world, the murder happened first, the mask, the murders. And then the women either tried, some of them did successfully, they turned their murder into a franchise. So yes.
As you do.
So
turn
one woman,
trauma into
money.
Cash. Yeah.
And that's what some of the girls did, was turn their traumas into money and like wrote books or whatever. But the problem is that they are the main character. So she, I'm not going to spoil it because you don't figure out what happened to her until much later in the book. But she's terrified. Like the world is evil, scary, and she's preparing herself every day. She runs on the treadmill to make sure she can always outrun a murderer. Her best friend is a plant named Fine, short for Final Girls.
Oh boy.
So she is very like secretive. No one knows where she lives. She takes like 8 buses to get anywhere, so no one can follow her.
Sure.
She's very sneaky. But one day, one of the people at her support group is murdered, and everyone's freaking out. And a lot of what the main character talks about is the tropes of murders and like serial killers and like their issues. She's like, there's always a second time they show up, and that's how you become like the final girl. Like that's how you become, how you get your little badge of honor. And it's interesting to see how these women have grown from their trauma and how they view the world, because they're afraid because a stranger came and murdered all their friends. Right. And it's but this one girl, and she doesn't feel quite like she's connected to the final girls. She doesn't feel like she's quite a final girl, and I'll get into that more. And she finds out, because she's more paranoid, she finds out that something else is going on, that the other girls are just like, nope, it was an accident, things happen.
Right.
But she's like, nope, someone's stalking us. And they're like, no. So she has to rescue the final girls and stop more final girls from being the final girls.
Great.
It's very good. It takes you on a ride. It's like fast paced. And sometimes I was like, I get it, she's paranoid. But it kind of, by the time when something happens, you're kind of like, oh, I can't believe she did it, because she was so paranoid. But it's very good. It's a fun read. It's kind of like funny in a way where like you're like, oh yes, make a movie out of my murder. Like, I don't know. It's just very good.
Now, I'm not very surprised by that, because we have recommended books by this author before, even on the podcast. We recommended Horror Store, which is a haunted IKEA knockoff store. Like, you can't call it an IKEA because you get sued, but it's an IKEA. We recommended that one before. It's super fun, and I love that book. And the book itself looks like an IKEA catalog. It's amazing.
That's so funny.
Recommend that one too. And then we also recommended recently his, I think it's called The Southern Vampire Book Club or something.
Yes. I was going to read that one next.
That's him too. Yes. So he writes some good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've given you a nice rundown of some different slashers. Inevitably, these are horrors, and they're horror books where people are being murdered violently. I don't know that any of them are super explicit, but I will put some extra notes in the show notes on tvplofftheshelf.com, just like a couple trigger warnings of different things, just so if you do want a bit more detail before you dig into any of them, you can check that out. As always, please rate, review, subscribe, follow us on the different platforms you can find us, any podcast platform, as well as on YouTube. If you have comments or suggestions of themes you would like us to take on, you can email us at readthisnext@tvpl.ca. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with more spooky reads.